On this day, in 1933, the Brisbane Police Court was yet again dealing with an issue that had been ongoing for some years. Whilst the Underbelly Razor series, played on Australian television in 2011, glorified the Razor Gang phenomenon in Sydney's Darlinghurst, Brisbane's track record of razor slash attacks was easily on par. Over the previous 2 days, there had been a spate of razor attacks across Brisbane, leaving 3 victims with severe wounds that required urgent medical attention. West End resident Henry Leo Thomas became embroiled in an altercation with Thomas Claude Askew, his lodger, in the hallway of their family home on O'Connell Street. Askew unleashed on Thomas with a straight razor after the latter had passed unfavourable comment on the former's wife Rebecca, gashing him from ear to ear and practically severing his nose. Continuing, Askew cut his victim from the temple to the back of the neck right down to the skull, then across the throat, almost severing the jugular vein. As a final insult, Askew finished with a 9-inch or 20cm long gash to the bone right across Thomas's shoulder. Unbelievably, Thomas managed to chase his assailant out into O'Connell Street, collapsing 200 metres away in Franklin Street due to loss of blood, where he was finally discovered by the attending police. On the night beforehand, Doris Vera Muriel Asmussen knocked off from her shift as a barmaid at the Australian Hotel, where she was met by an acquaintance, Patrick John Gavin. Walking up to City Hall on Adelaide Street together, the couple travelled back to Asmussen's home on Somerset Street in Windsor via the tram. On Doris declining Patrick's request for a date on the following evening, when within yards of her front gate, he immediately set upon her with a straight razor. Slashing Doris across the bridge of the nose and leaving a 4-inch long gash across her cheek, Patrick turned and calmly walked off into the darkness, leaving his victim to stagger into the house in search of aid. Doris's wounds were attended to by a doctor, with 12 stitches being required to close the deep incision on her left cheek. Shortly after, Patrick was arrested at a city hotel for the attack and was returned to Doris's house. On Doris positively identifying her assailant, a detailed account of the incident was provided and 3 foolscap pages of statement were subsequently signed. Across town, yet another attack had occurred. James Grady, a resident of Musgrave Road, was found outside the Normanby Hotel after collapsing on the footpath, his clothing saturated with blood. Meagerly dressed in a singlet and pyjama pants, it was discovered on examination that he was suffering from a gash behind the left ear, as well as a frightfully deep 5-inch long gash across his left thigh, both inflicted by a straight razor. He too was rushed to the hospital for treatment, but after repeated questioning and request to provide a statement, Grady refused to name his assailant. On the 10th of April, after their arrests the night before, Thomas Claude Askew and Patrick John Gavin were brought before the police court. Both cases were initially remanded, with Thomas Askew eventually being sentenced to 2 years imprisonment for the attempted murder of Henry Thomas. Ironically, on delving back through the historical record, it wasn't the first time Thomas Askew had been before the courts for a sensational assault that spilled into the street. 8 years earlier, Thomas had been a well-known jockey further north in Townsville. One night, whilst out drinking with his wife, the couple had bickered and an assault had taken place. Returning to the Empire Hotel where she resided, Rebecca Askew collected a small revolver loaded with 4 bullets before heading back to Sturt Street and her husband to question him about £5 in missing money. The pair's argument degraded to fisticuffs, with Thomas striking Rebecca and breaking her nose with a careless punch. With nothing left to lose, Rebecca withdrew her revolver and fired on Thomas, missing dismally but alerting all and sundry in the vicinity that something was utterly amiss. As the ambulance and another taxi car arrived minutes later, Rebecca decided to take one last pot shot at her husband, managing to miss her husband yet again but successfully shooting the taxi car driver through the ankle as he walked over to provide aid. The case ended up before the court, with Thomas being placed on a 6-month good behaviour order as a result. Patrick Gavin, however, in the case of Doris Asmussen's assault, was discharged once his case was brought before the Supreme Court. Despite having both positively identified Gavin on the night of the attack and signing a 3-page statement detailing the incident, Doris Asmussen refused to identify him as her attacker before the court, citing complete and utter memory loss. With a likely fear of reprisal forefront in her mind, the case against Patrick Gavin was disappointingly dismissed.